Dick Parsons is not just the Citigroup chairman. He's been a board member since 1996. He's a former lawyer, former senior White House aide, former CEO of Time Warner, and of course a fixture in the New York City business, philanthropic, and political communities. Dick, your first television interview in more than a year. It's great to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Nice to be here.
You're here in your capacity as Citigroup chairman, so we're going to start with some questions about Citigroup. Some people wonder why anyone who was on Citigroup's board before the financial crisis would still be on it. You think that's a legitimate concern?
I think it's a legitimate question. And I can answer it in my case because I felt that first of all, Citi is a remarkable institution. Not just here in New York or here in the United States, but around the world. It's really a sort of unique and fundamentally important financial institution, and I thought that I had something to contribute to bailing it out of the difficulties it found itself in, and I also would find it difficult, you know, when your team runs into trouble. That's not the time to quit the team. That said, though, as you know, we've been restructuring the board and bringing on lots of new talent with new perspectives and new expertise or different expertise. So I think we've got to a place of good balance now between old and new.
I mentioned that you've been a Citigroup director for quite a long time, almost 15 years. You've known John Reed, Sandy Weil, Robert Rubin, of course, Chuck Prince, and now the current CEO, Vikraim Pandit. Looking back, from your personal perspective, how is it that you and other directors missed the warning signs that we now know were so evident? What was it that you couldn't see? What was it that you weren't looking for?
Well, I think we probably missed all those things that one misses when one doesn't have hindsight, you know, to go by. And, you know, I think in fairness to my former colleagues and my continuing colleagues, I mean, this was a conflagration that sort of engulfed everybody, not just Citi, not just U.S. financial institutions around the world. It was really the sort of popping of a bubble of, you know, too much extension of credit. We were over-levered, frankly, around the globe, and underweighted the risk involved with that leverage, and that was a global phenomenon. And I think that in hindsight, we can all look at it and say, oh, geez, we missed this signal, we missed that signal. But, you know, in the real world, you don't get to operate by hindsight that often.
Fair enough. At the same time, though, even Chuck Prince, for all that's been said about him, knew what was going on. He was quoted, and it's a famous quote, you'll remember it well, when he said, you've got to get up and dance as long as the music is playing. And he knew that when the music stopped, as he said, there were going to be problems in terms of liquidity. Shouldn't that have been the time, at the very least, that Citigroup's board stepped in to do something, or that, as you say, that somebody else did something in the broader financial system?
No, I think that you know, the board had a very good interaction with all of those CEOs that you mentioned, and when we felt as a board it was appropriate to step in, we certainly made those views known, and people were tacking and hauling as we were going through what turned out to be, you know, a storm of proportion we didn't realize quite how intense it would be. I don't think anybody else did either. But, you know, at the time that Chuck made those comments, I think Citigroup was coming off of its most profitable quarter ever. And, you know, we all float on an ocean. We're all ships on this ocean floating and trying to navigate as carefully and as thoughtfully as we can with respect to our customers, with respect to our shareholders, with respect to our regulators. And then what happened was a storm of once in 3 generations since the Great Depression came up and blew all the ships off course.
Dick, you mentioned that you've recruited some highly qualified new directors to Citigroup's board, and you have. A lot of people have commented on it, in fact, called it remarkable. You've even been able to get the board member of another bank to join. Tell me, what other steps have you taken to improve corporate governance since becoming lead director back in July of 2008 and subsequently chairman of the board?
Well, we committed to sort of restructuring the board to bring on essentially a majority of new independent directors who had financial expertise and who were sort of identified and selected because of the skills and aptitudes they brought to our set of problems right now. So we've done that. We've also restructured our committee structure so that we now have a special risks committee. Used to be part of audit and risk. In an organization as complicated and as global as Citi, that was just too much weight to put on one committee. We decided, so we broke it out and have a separate risk committee, which now is headed by a guy named Jerry Grunhofer, who used to run U.S. Bancorp and who is considered by many, you know, if you ask Warren Buffett who's the best banker in America, he'd tell you Jerry Grunhofer. We also created a Citi Holdings committee, which is run by a guy named Mike O'Neill, who is also a former banker, used to be the CEO of Bank of Hawaii and was CFO of Bank of America before that, and who brings a lot of skills to bear on working out of troubled assets or winding down businesses that are no longer part of the strategy. So those two committees have become very involved, and they didn't exist before. And so the board has stepped up its level of engagement with the management. It's still a management show, but we've got a lot of board support.
How would you rate Vikram Pandit's performance as CEO?
Listen, I think Vikram's done a tremendous job. I think Vikram has done a tremendous job, and he has been not given the credit that I think is due him and his team. His team being really all the people of Citi. We fell into a pretty deep hole, and I think it's clear to the markets now that Citi is climbing out of that hole and will get out of that hole, will emerge, and that's because an awful lot of people have put in an awful lot of time and creativity in working through what were some enormous problems, and Vikram has led that effort. He has the support of the board, and he has my personal gratitude for being, frankly, as selfless as he's been in doing all this. You know, the guy put himself on $1 a year a couple of years ago and says, I won't earn more than $1 a year until we turn this thing around, until Citi starts making money. And yet he's worked as hard as anybody could to get the ship turned around, because he believes in the organization, he believes in the people of the organization, and he wants to win.
Dick, a couple of questions about things in the news, shall we say. In your opinion, why should it take a court-ordered report for the world to find out what really happened at Lehman Brothers?
You know, the world will never find out what really happened at Lehman Brothers, court-ordered or not. I mean, you know, these organizations have gotten to a level of complexity and dynamism. I mean, things happen on not a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis. And so what you'll find are people's kind of recollections of one piece of the elephant they were touching at a given point in time. Putting the whole picture back together at this point in time, I think, is probably not doable.
Would you open Citigroup's records up to similar scrutiny?
First thing I do is I touch base with my lawyers in terms of what our obligations are. But secondly, I don't know that you know, that could take an awful lot of time and talent and treasure to sort of pour over that, and I don't know what it yields you. I mean, the issue is we are where we are. We generally know how we got there. We know where we have to get to. How are we going to now get from where we are to where we have to get this institution back out into deep water again, off the sandbar? That's what I focus on.
And before we go, a question about your old haunt in the media industry. What would you be doing about China right now if you were Erik Schmidt at Google?
Well, I'm going to answer that by just telling you what we did back in the earlier part of this decade. Right after the merger between Time Warner and AOL, we had a deal in China with, I think the name of the company was Legend, the computer company there. And we were going to put the AOL client on those computers at the manufacturer, so that every computer that went out would have the AOL client already built in and would give us a big leg up in terms of AOL. And then we ran into a bunch of demands in terms of words that had to be obliterated or couldn't be used, like democracy, demands about access that the government wanted to all the traffic, and we basically said pass.
So you know what it's like to be Google in China. Dick, thank you very much for joining us.